You know what time it is? Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! Hi! It's Storytime with Chris. Welcome back. It's a beautiful Monday. Also, for those who are knowledgeable know, it's officially Mercury retrograde season. So do your best to try to be nice to each other, genuinely speaking, and try not to say anything you don't mean. And try not to be mean in the things that you say. I was going to word that a lot better, but life and age and time. All right, y'all, we are back with Lloyd Alexander's The Castle of Llyr. And also, by the way, I'm going to show this really quickly before we start. So, this was a childhood book that I had read to me when I was a kid. Does anybody remember Madeline? It was a huge thing in the 90s and the 80s. Madeline was up there with like Winnie the Pooh, Corduroy, Rupert the Panda. It was a good time. Paddington. So we will read this story. I remember reading Madeline's Christmas 2 years ago. So I'm going to read you the original first story of Madeline. And this is how much of a fan I was. So I watched the animated series growing up of Madeline. Me and my brother were obsessed. I couldn't tell you why. She was just cool. So then they made a live action movie, and I remember my mom taking me to go see it. And it was spot on. It was spot on like the children's books of the TV show. It was great. Even Little Pepino. It was great. And then it's interesting. Wait a minute. Oh my gosh, y'all. I think I might also have to read another one because St. George's Day is coming up, and if anybody remembers, it's one of my favorite legends of all time, St. George and the Dragon, designed by one of my favorite illustrators of all time, who, if she were still alive, I would have loved for Trina Shart Hyman to illustrate my novel that I've been talking about for a long period of time that is going to be published at a date, but I love her artwork. Because it's so portrait-esque, but it's still a children's story. It's very beautiful. And she just does a beautiful job of, like, bringing life and emotion to her drawings. So we will be reading that for St. George's Day. Lots of stuff to read. There's never such a thing as too many books, because no matter how old or young you are, you should always be reading, whether it be a book, a novella, a novel, a sports page, a magazine, a manga, a mangua. You should always be reading. Whatever it is, you should always be reading. I'm just a snob and I prefer the physical text, even though I have some digital books because some of them are out of print. I definitely prefer to pick up a book and read. So I already cleaned my glasses because y'all know habitually I will forget. So, last time we were here, come to find out, Ilanwi and the chief steward, Mag, have been seen running off into the forest of the Isle of Mona. And they made us 2 search parties. And apparently Prince Rune, because if you've been paying attention to these chapters, we don't sit with Rune. We don't eat with Rune. He's not invited to our lunch table. Rune is the prime example of what it means to be a brown noser, and I explained what that was 2 videos ago, but to reiterate for those in the back, a brown noser is the type of person who does a lot of good things to get in people's good graces to be in their business. That's what a brown noser is. They mean well, but they're also shady, and we don't deal with shady people, not on this channel at least. So we're going to see what happens with Taran, Fluter, and Gurgi, and see if they can go find Princess Ilanwe, Prince Rune, and Mag, and we'll see what happens. Chapter 6, The Potions of Glue. At these words, Gurgi set up a wail and rocked back and forth, clutching his head. Taran swallowed his own despair as best he could, and tried to reassure the frightened creature. We could do nothing now but wait for dawn, Taran said. The master of horse cannot be too far away. Find him as soon as you can. Above all, do not delay the search for Ilanwe. I shall seek Prince Rune, he added bitterly. I've given my oath to keep him from harm, and I cannot do otherwise. But when I find him, I'll rejoin you somehow. You know, that's one thing about Taran. He may not like the prince, but at least he's going to keep his word. Taran is not going to leave people hanging. Sounds a lot like me. I'm not going to leave you hanging. I might wait a little bit, but I'm going to help out in a little bit. Just give me time. I mean, you could be surrounded by a den of lions, and if we have beef, I mean, I'm going to bring the bacon. No, I'm just kidding. All right. He was silent then, his head bowed. Llyr was watching him. Do not wear out your heart with grief, the bard said quietly. Mag can't escape us for long. I don't believe he means to harm Ilanwe, but only bring her to Akred, and we shall catch him long before he can do that. Rest now. Gurgi and I will share the watch. Too weary to protest, Taran stretched out on the ground and covered himself with his cloak. No sooner did his eyes close than fears of Akred came to torment him. In rage and vengeance, the haughty queen would slay any of the companions who fell into her hands. And Ilanwe? He dare not let himself imagine her in Akred's grasp. When at last he dropped into fitful slumber, it was though he slept beneath a millstone. The sun had barely risen when he opened his eyes with a start. Llyr was shaking him. The bard's yellow hair stood out raggedly in all directions. His face was pale with fatigue, but he grinned broadly. Good news, he cried. Gurgi and I have done some sneakings and peekings of our own. We're not as badly lost as you might think. The truth of it is, we've been thrashing around in a circle. Look for yourself. Taran sprang to his feet and followed the bard to a low ridge. You're right. There's the alder grove. It must be. And there, I remember the fallen tree where I lost sight of Rune. Come, he added, we shall ride that far together. Then you must go ahead and catch up with the rest of the band. Hastily, the companions mounted and urged their steeds toward the grove. Before they reached it, Taran's horse drew up sharply, then bore suddenly to the left. A loud whinny rose from the cover of trees along the shoulder of a hill. In astonishment, Taran slackened the reins and let the horse canter freely toward the sound. In another few moments, he glimpsed a pale shape beyond the foliage. As the steed carried him closer, he recognized Rune's piebald mare. See there, he called to Llyr. Rune can't be far. We must have gone by him during the night. Reining up, he leapt from the saddle. His heart sank. The horse stood riderless. At the sight of the other steeds, she raised her head, shook her mane, and whickered anxiously. Fearing the worst, Taran hurried past the mare, while Llyr and Gurgi dismounted and raced after him. He stopped short. Before him, in a clearing, stood something that looked at first like a huge straw beehive. Llyr by then had come up beside him. Taran raised a hand in warning and moved cautiously toward the strange hut. The conical thatched roof he now saw had fallen away in many places. Rough stones piled one on top of the other formed a low side wall, a corner of which had collapsed into a heap of rubble. There were no windows. And the single heavy door hung askew from sagging leather hinges. He stepped closer. The holes in the thatch stared at him like empty eyes. Llyr glanced about him. I'm not too fond of going up and rapping on the door, he whispered, and asking who's ever inside whether they've happened to see the Prince of Mona. Somehow it seems the kind of place even Rune would rather avoid, but I suppose there's no other way to find out. Just then the door flung open from the inside. Gurgi, with a yell, sought safely by scrambling up a tree. Taran's hand went to his sword, not his chord. I don't even think that's a word. Chord. It's like cord and chore. Chord. Yes. We make up words here at Storytime. No, I'm just kidding. Hello, Prince Rune. Beaming, stood in the doorway. Aside from looking a little sleepy, he appeared quite himself and altogether unharmed. I hope you've got some breakfast with you, he added, rubbing his hands eagerly. I'm nearly starved to death. Have you ever noticed how the fresh air sharpens one's appetite? Most surprising. Come in, Rune went on, while Taran stared speechless at him. You'd be amazed how comfortable it is. Surprisingly snug and cozy. Where did the rest of you pass the night? I hope you slept as well as I did. You can't imagine... Taran couldn't control himself no longer. "What have you done?" he burst out. "Why did you leave the searching party? Count yourself lucky that getting lost was the worst that happened to you." Prince Rune blinked and looked puzzled. "Leaving the search party?" he asked. "Well, I didn't actually leave it. Not on purpose, you understand. I actually happened when I fell off my horse. I had to go chasing after her all over nowhere until I found her near this hut. But then it was getting dark, so I went to sleep. That's only common sense, wouldn't you say? I mean, why sleep outdoors when you can put a roof over your head?" "As far as being lost goes," Rune went on, "it seems to me you're the ones who got lost. Wherever I go, that's where the search is, if you see what I mean. After all, the one who's in command—" "Yes, you command," Tarn flung back angrily. "As you were born to, as a king's son," he stopped abruptly. Another instant, and he would have cried aloud his promise to King Rutlam and his oath to protect his witless prince. Tarn clenched his teeth. "Prince Rune," he said coldly, "you need not remind us we are under your orders, but for your own safety, I urge you to stay close to us." "And I advise you to stay away from strange huts," put in Fluter. "Last time I was in one, I almost got changed into a toad." The bard shook his head. "Shun them huts, that is," he added. "You never know what disagreeable thing you'll run into, and by the time you find out, it's too late." "Changed into a toad?" cried Rune, not the least dismayed. "I say, that might be interesting. I should like to try it one day, but there's nothing like that to worry about. No one lives here, and they haven't for a long time." "Hurry then," Tarn said, resolving, never again to let Prince Rune out of his sight. "We must join the others. We'll have long, hard riding before we catch up to them." "Immediately," said Rune, who was wearing nothing but his shirt. "I shall get my things together." Apparently, he got really comfortable being lost in somebody's house. That could have easily... The situation could have gotten worse. It's like the Three Bears, kids. You know how Goldilocks went to the bear's house and she was like, "This porridge is too hot. This porridge is too cold. This porridge is just right." You know what happened? She almost got ate up. Goldilocks almost got. Okay? This is not what we want. We knock on the door. We see if somebody answers. We see if a light is on before we walk into somebody's house. Because that's how you get turned into Goldie Chops instead of Goldilocks, okay, if you catch my drift. Gurgi, meanwhile, had clambered down from the tree, his curiosity getting the better of his prudence. He loped across the clearing and thrust his head into the doorway, at last venturing inside with Rune. Fluter and the impatient Tarn followed him. It was, Tarn saw as the prince had told them, a heavy layer of dust covered the wooden tables and benches. A spider had spun an enormous web in one corner, but even the web was deserted. On a broken hearthstone lay the charred remnants of a long-dead fire. Near the hearth a number of large cookpots, dry and empty now, had been overturned. Earthen bowls and tall jars, shattered into fragments, were strewn about the floor. Through the holes in the roof the leaves of more than one autumn had fallen. Nearly bearing a stool whose legs had broken into splinters, the hut was silent. The noises of the forest did not enter. Tarn stood uneasily while Prince Rune fumbled with his gear. Gurgi, fascinated by so many strange odds and ends, lost no time in poking through them. Suddenly he cried out in surprise. "Look! Look!" he called, holding up a sheaf of tattered parchment. Gurgi knelt beside Tarn and examined the rugged bundle. The field mice, he realized, had discovered the package long before. Many of the sheets had been gnawed away, others were rain-sodded and blotted. The few undamaged pages were covered with cramped writing. Only at the bottom of the pile did Tarn find pages in good repair. These had been carefully bound in leather to make a small tome, and the surface was clear and unmarked. Prince Rune, who still had not got around to buckling on his sword, came to peer over Tarn's shoulder. "I say," he cried, "what have you there? I can't guess what it is, but it looks interesting. And isn't that a handsome little book? I shouldn't mind having it to put down things I'm supposed to remember to do." "Prince Rune," Tarn said, handing the undamaged volume to the Prince of Mona, who thrust it into his jacket. "Believe me, if there's anything you might ever help you do anything, you're welcome to it." He went back to puzzling over the parchments. "Between the mice and the weather," he went on, "there's not much to make out of this scrawl. There seems to be no beginning or ending. But as far as I can tell, these are recipes for potions." Potions? Cried Fluter. Great Beeler, that's something we've little use for. Taran, nevertheless, continued to scan and sort the pages. Wait, I think I found the name of whoever wrote them. Glue, it looks like. Glew. And the potions, as it says here, are to... His voice faltered, and he turned anxiously to Fluter. To make yourself bigger? What can this mean? How's that? Asked the bard. Bigger? Are you sure you haven't read it wrong? He took the pages from Taran's hand and examined them carefully himself. When he had finished, he gave a low whistle. In my wanderings, said Fluter, I've managed to learn a number of things, not least of which is don't meddle. I fear that's exactly what this fellow Glue did. Indeed, what he sought was a potion to make himself bigger and stronger. If those are Glue's boots over there, he added, pointing to the corner, he surely needed one, for he must have been a little fellow. Half hidden by leaves, a pair of well-worn boots lay on the side. They were hardly large enough to fit a child, and seemed to Taran pitiful in their smallness and emptiness. He must have been painstaking, Fluter went on. I'll say that much for him. He describes everything he did and set down all his recipes quite carefully and methodically. As for his ingredients, the bard said, making a sour face, I should rather not think about them. Yuck! I say, Prince Rune eagerly interrupted, perhaps we should try them ourselves. It would be interesting to see what happens. No, Gurgi shouted. Gurgi wants no tastings of nasty lotions and potions. Nor do I, said Fluter, and neither did Glue, for the matter of that. He had no wish to drink his concoctions until he had some hope they'd work, for which I can't blame him in the least. He went about it very cleverly. As I gather from what he's written down, continued the bard, he went out and trapped a mountain cat. A small one, I should think, since Glue himself was such a small person. He brought her back, put her in a cage, and fed her his potions as fast as he could cook them up. Poor creature, said Taran. Indeed, agreed the bard. I shouldn't have liked to be in her place, yet he must have grown fond enough to give her a name. Here, he's written it down. Lion. Apart from feeding her those dreadful messes, I expect he didn't treat her badly. She might even have been company for him, living alone as he did. So it's spelled L-L-Y-A-N's lion. Lion. That's what I would imagine the pronunciation would be. But correct me if I'm wrong for those of Welsh descent that know the proper pronunciation. At last it happened, Fluter went on. You can see by his writing how excited Glue must have been. Lion began to grow. Glue mentions he was obliged to make a new cage for her, and still another. How pleased he must have been. I can easily imagine the little fellow chuckling and brewing away for all he was worth. Fluter turned to the last page. And so it ends, he said, where the mice have eaten the parchment. They've done away with Glue's last recipe. As for Glue and Lion, they've vanished along with it. Taran was silent, looking at the empty boots and overturned cookpots. Glue certainly is gone, he said thoughtfully, but I have a feeling he didn't go far. How's that? Asked the bard. Oh, I take your meaning, he said, shuddering. Ooh, yes, it does look rather, shall I say, sudden? As I see Glue, he was a neat and orderly sort. He would hardly go off leaving his hut as it is now, without his boots and at that. Poor little fellow, he sighed. It only proves the dangers of meddling. For all his pains, Glue must have gotten himself gobbled up. And if you ask me, the wisest thing for us to do is to leave immediately. Taran nodded and rose to his feet. As he did, terrified whinnies and the galloping hooves filled the air. The horses, he cried, racing to the door. Before he could reach it, the door burst from its hinges. Taran clutched at his sword and stumbled back into the hut as a huge shape leaped at him. And that is where we will end for tonight. There's so many twists and turns in this story. So many mysteries yet to be unfold. But as always, y'all, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max and relax and chillax and break time. Whenever you have time to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. I love you all very much, and I will see you next time.